Hi, I'm Rowan. On my mother's 60th birthday, I watched my stepfather slap her across the face, then turn to me and say we were both just burdens. My stepbrother shoved us toward the door, cursing, forgetting every square inch of that penthouse was paid by me. The bills, the meals, the roof over their heads, funded by $8,000 a month from my own inheritance. That night, I made a decision. I took my mother, cut them off, sold the penthouse, and pulled back the curtain on every lie they ever lived behind. But what happened next wasn't about money. It was about survival. And the war they started, I ended it. But not before they tried to destroy everything I had left. So here's the truth. Do you really know your family? Or just the version they let you keep believing in? Dallas was cooling down for the evening as I drove toward the penthouse. The sky still held a faint orange line behind the buildings, the kind of glow that made the city feel softer than it really was. I had a small box in my pocket, a simple necklace I bought for my mother's 60th birthday. Nothing fancy, just something I knew she would smile at. She always liked gifts that felt personal, never the expensive things. Those, somehow, made her uncomfortable. When I stepped out of the elevator and into the foyer, the familiar scent of her cooking drifted out. It made me pause for a moment. That apartment had eaten more of my income than any place I ever lived, even though I never called it home. $8,000 a month, mortgage, HOA fees, power, insurance, her medical coverage, groceries, pieces of my life handed over so she didn't have to feel pressure. She never asked for it. I took that on myself. Inside, my mother was moving quietly around the kitchen, placing plates on the counter. Harlan sat at the head of the table as if he owned the place, his shoulders stiff, jaw grinding. Daxton, his son, leaned back in a chair, eyes on his phone like he was waiting for someone more interesting to arrive. Mom smiled when she saw me. It was soft, a little tired. I hugged her gently. She always felt smaller than she looked, like a person who learned to fold herself to fit the room. Dinner started slow. She made baked chicken, green beans, cornbread. Simple things she liked. When she set the plate in front of Harlan, he tapped the edge with his fork and gave her that look he reserved for moments when he felt the world wasn't bending fast enough for him. "This is cold," he said. She stiffened. "It just came out of the oven." "Well, it doesn't taste like it." Daxton chuckled under his breath, not looking up from his phone. I kept my eyes low, breathing steady. I'd lived with this tone for years. Not in my home, but through quiet phone calls from my mother, the kind where she pretended everything was normal. I tried to ease the air. "Mom, it looks good. Smells good too." Harlan shot me a glance. "No one asked you." My mother whispered, "Harlan, please, it's my birthday. Let's just eat." But he wasn't done. "You and your son always want something, always needing someone else to clean up your mess." That was when she stood straighter than I'd seen in a long time. "I don't want trouble tonight. Could you lower your voice?" He rose so fast his chair scraped across the floor. His face turned a deep shade of red. Before I understood what was happening, his hand struck her cheek with a crack that made the room shrink. "You're both a burden," he said. I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because something in me broke in a way I couldn't hide anymore. I'd seen arguments, insults, quiet cruelty, but this was different. This was a line crossed so sharply there was no pretending it didn't happen. I stepped between them and kept my voice steady. "You don't touch her again." Harlan leaned in. "You think you're some kind of hero. This isn't your house. You don't make the rules here." Before I could answer, I heard footsteps behind me. Daxton walked over, still holding his phone like we interrupted whatever entertainment he had going. "Just leave," he said. He shoved me first. It wasn't a hard hit, more like a push meant to show he could. When my mother reached for my arm, he shoved her too, sending both of us stumbling toward the door. "We don't need either of you," he added. "Go." Mom tried to catch her balance and her green handkerchief fell from her hand. She always carried it, a small square of fabric she embroidered years ago. I picked it up automatically and slipped it into my pocket as I steadied her. The door shut behind us before I found words. The hallway felt colder than outside. She was shaking, whispering apologies she didn't owe. I stood still for a moment, staring at the closed door, my heartbeat dull in my ears. They truly believed they owned the life I paid for. They believed kindness was weakness. They believed my mother belonged to whatever mood controlled that household. I looked down at the handkerchief in my hand. The stitching had worn in the corners. My mother's initials were still visible, faded but there. Something inside me aligned with a clarity that didn't need to be spoken. "If they don't need me," I said softly, "they won't have me." I drove my mother back to my house, and for the first time, she didn't tell me to forgive them. She didn't whisper about keeping the peace or ask me to let it go, just this once. She sat beside me in silence, one hand resting on her lap, the other pressed gently to her cheek where Harlan had struck her. The night was quiet by the time we pulled into my driveway. The street lamps cast long shadows across the front yard. I parked, helped her out, and walked her slowly into the house. She winced a little as she moved, her shoulders stiff. Inside, the warmth of my living room was a stark contrast to what we had just come from. I took her coat, draped it over the back of the couch, and eased her down onto the cushions. She looked around the room like it was unfamiliar, even though she'd been here dozens of times. "I'm okay," she said, trying to smile. "It's nothing." "You don't have to say that," I said gently, kneeling in front of her. "You don't have to pretend anymore." Her fingers instinctively brushed the edge of her cheek, trying to cover the red mark even though she knew I'd already seen it. I didn't press her. I just sat there for a moment, waiting for her breathing to settle. "I ruined everything," she whispered. "I shouldn't have said anything." "You didn't ruin anything," I said, my voice low. "They did. And maybe it's time we both stopped protecting people who never protected us." She didn't answer, just looked away, ashamed, but I saw it in her eyes. Something had shifted. Later that night, once she'd gone to bed in the guest room, I sat in my home office with a glass of water, staring at my computer. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, just that I needed to do something. I opened my finance folders. It wasn't hard to find what I needed. Automatic transfers, utility statements, HOA dues, emergency bills, everything, down to dental copays, had come from my accounts. $8,000 a month, sometimes more. I scrolled through the numbers and realized I hadn't missed a single payment in over 5 years. Harlan had paid nothing. Daxton? Not a cent. My stomach twisted. I thought back to every family gathering, every smirk from Daxton when I brought groceries, every time Harlan rolled his eyes at a gift I gave Mom, all the little signs I'd brushed off. I told myself it was better to keep the peace. Mom had told me that once. Let's keep peace. It's easier this way. And I'd lived by it. Quietly, faithfully, stupidly. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing the bridge of my nose, I wanted to feel rage, but it wasn't there. Not yet. What I felt was something colder, a clarity I hadn't allowed myself in years. I clicked into a cloud drive I rarely used, trying to find an old receipt. But something caught my eye. A folder labeled Smart Home Audio, Penthouse. I blinked. I'd helped set up Mom's smart speaker years ago. Turns out it's still backed up to my cloud. Curious, I opened the folder and clicked on the first file. It crackled for a moment, then I heard Harlan's voice. The boy thinks paying bills makes him important. Daxton laughed. We'll milk him until he dries. I sat frozen. Another file. Harlan again. If Marlo weren't so weak, she'd tell him to stop showing up. I stopped breathing for a moment, not because it hurt, but because it all suddenly made sense. They never saw me as part of the family. I was a bank account, a silent ATM with no opinions and no boundaries. Every visit, every holiday, every quiet sacrifice. I was just funding their lives while being mocked behind closed doors. My hand trembled slightly as I clicked one more file. Just more of the same. Condescension, arrogance, mockery. My name used like a punchline. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. What settled over me was too clean for that. That was the moment it all became simple. A knock came at the office door. I paused the audio. Come in. It creaked open and Mom stepped in, her face pale, eyes red. She must have heard something from the hallway. She saw the screen, the folder, the audio still playing low. She covered her mouth. Oh God, Rowan, I didn't know they said that. I stood and crossed to her before she could say another word. Stop. You don't have to apologize for them. Not anymore. Tears slipped down her cheek. I should have protected you. I pulled her into a hug. Mom, none of this is your fault, but it ends tonight. She nodded against my shoulder. After she left the room, I turned back to the desk, opened a secure folder, and pulled up the legal documents I had buried for years. Inheritance accounts, the deed to the penthouse, terms of transfer. I started reading carefully, line by line. No more reactions. This time, I was going to move like a man who had nothing to lose, and every reason to act. That was the moment I realized they hadn't just taken advantage of me. They had rewritten my place in my own family. At sunrise, I drove back to the penthouse, not to reconcile, but to see what else they had been hiding. My mother was still asleep when I left. I didn't tell her where I was going. I wasn't sure she'd want to know. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that only happens right before the city fully wakes up. I parked in the guest section of the building, not in the assigned spot I'd been paying for. I didn't want any trace of familiarity tagging along with me. Not today. As I walked through the lobby, the front desk clerk, Jerry, a man I'd spoken to maybe twice, nodded at me with that respectful tone I'd heard him use for longtime residents. Morning, Mr. Vance, he said. Didn't expect you this early. I gave a short nod. Just checking on a few things. He smiled politely and looked back at his screen. He didn't ask questions, probably because he knew who really signed the checks around here. Riding the elevator up, I stared at my own reflection in the stainless steel doors. I didn't look angry. I looked detached. And I think that was worse. When I stepped into the penthouse, the smell hit me first. Cheap whiskey, stale takeout, something burnt in the sink. The place was a mess. The TV was still blaring, unattended. Some game show flashing colored lights across the walls. Shoes were kicked off in the hallway, laundry half stuffed into a basket. A beer can rolling lazily across the tile. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a dump someone crashed in, paid for by someone else. I walked through the living room slowly, taking it in. The rug I'd helped Mom pick out was stained. The art on the wall, a gift from me last Christmas, was crooked, one corner peeling off. There wasn't a single sign that anyone cared about the space, or about who gave it to them. I reached the hallway closet, opened the drawer at the bottom, and started digging. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I found it anyway. Stacks of mail, cards, letters, documents that had nothing to do with me, except they had everything to do with me. A Christmas card from one of my cousins addressed to Harlan. "Thanks for all you do for Aunt Marlowe. I heard you've been covering everything. You're a good man." My hands tensed. Then emails, printed, folded, from Daxton to some of his friends. "My dad pays for the whole place. Rowan's just a name on the lease." Another. "He likes showing up now and then to act like a hero. We let him. Whatever keeps the money coming." I couldn't move for a few seconds. I just stood there with the papers in my hand, breathing through clenched teeth. They didn't just take the money, they took the credit. They rewrote the narrative, so I became the charity case. All those years, birthdays, anniversaries, hospital bills, even a home security system I installed myself, they'd painted themselves as the providers. And me? I was just the fool who kept showing up. The slap last night wasn't the deepest cut. This was. I dropped the papers and moved to the kitchen. That's when I remembered the speaker, same model I'd found files from last night. I tapped into the voice logs again, scrolling until I saw a file from 2 weeks ago. I hesitated for a moment, then hit play. Daxton's voice, laughing. "She's falling apart, man. Old, slow, and so damn dramatic. But hey, when she breaks down, Rowan will pick up the tab. Dad knows how to pull the strings." The laugh that followed was smug, confident, cruel. "She's pathetic, but useful. That's the trick. You keep her scared, keep her quiet. Rowan won't stop paying if he thinks she's suffering." I froze. He wasn't just mocking me anymore. He was talking about my mother like she was a pawn, something breakable, something to be manipulated. And suddenly, the disgust turned to something sharper, cleaner. That was it. They weren't just ungrateful. They were dangerous. Harlan hit her. Daxton used her. And I'd been standing between them and the consequences for years. No more. I stepped away from the speaker, grabbed my phone, and called Michael, my attorney. I didn't explain everything yet. Just said I needed to meet. Urgently. He heard something in my voice and didn't question it. I ended the call and reached into my jacket pocket. The green handkerchief was still there, folded neatly. I hadn't realized I'd brought it with me, but somehow it made sense. I held it for a moment, thumb running along the edge. The color reminded me of spring, of the garden Mom used to tend before life wore her down. "No more," I said aloud. I turned off the TV, shut the speaker down, and left the penthouse without looking back. I had tried to protect them for years, but by noon, I realized I would need to protect my mother from them. When my lawyer picked up the phone, the first words out of her mouth were, "Rowan, what did they do this time?" There was no small talk, no pleasantries. Emery Clark had known me long enough to recognize when something was wrong just by the way I breathed into the receiver. I exhaled slowly. It's not just what they did last night, Emery. It's what they've been doing for years. And I think it's time I stopped pretending I didn't see it. I told her everything. The slap, the shove, the recordings, the money, the lies. I spoke like someone pulling poison out of their own skin. Slow, careful, but determined. For the first time in years, I wasn't making excuses for them. I wasn't smoothing things over. I just let the truth sit there, ugly and bare. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. "Rowan," she said quietly, "I've been waiting for this call." That surprised me. "You knew?" "I suspected," she admitted. "But you've always insisted it was under control. That they just needed time or grace or whatever you were telling yourself to keep giving them the benefit of the doubt." I leaned against the kitchen counter, one hand gripping the edge. "I need to know if there's more," I said. "Something I've missed." She paused again, typing in the background. "Let me pull up the latest monitoring reports we've been running on your portfolio." A few seconds passed, then her tone changed. "Oh my God." "What?" "Rowan, Harlan tried to access your investment accounts multiple times." I blinked. "What?" "In the last month. He failed. Security blocked it each time, but he tried. Not just once. 3 different logins from the Penthouse's IP address. That's not accidental." I stood there stunned. "That's fraud." "It is. It's attempted identity theft. Financial manipulation at best. Criminal at worst." My stomach turned. I knew they were leeching off me, but trying to break into my accounts? That crossed every line. I wasn't just being taken advantage of. I was a target. I rubbed my forehead. "Leaving them alone last night wasn't enough, was it?" "No, it wasn't," she said gently. "They're not going to let you walk away quietly, especially not if it means their comfort disappears with you." She was right. Letting it go, hoping they'd simmer down, that wasn't protection. That was permission. "What's our next step?" I asked. "We secure your assets, fully. I'll start the paperwork this morning, and I want you to check with the HOA at the Penthouse. Something's been nagging at me." I nodded, already walking toward my home office. "I'll call them now." The HOA manager answered after a couple of rings. His name was Dennis, middle-aged, polite, always seemed nervous when I visited the building. "Mr. Vance, good morning. Everything okay?" "I hope so," I replied. "I just had a few questions. Have there been any complaints filed about me recently at the Penthouse?" There was a pause, long enough to make my chest tighten. "Mr. Vance, I wasn't sure if I should bring it up before, but yes, there have been several. Noise complaints, hostile behavior, missed payments on shared fees, all in your name." I closed my eyes. "Who filed them?" "Your stepfather and, I believe, your brother. At least, that's how the forms were signed." My jaw clenched. "And you believed them?" "Well, they're listed as residents, and you haven't been living there. So we assumed—" I cut him off calmly. "You assumed wrong. I pay every single fee, and I haven't raised my voice once inside that building. Not even when he slapped my mother." Silence again. "I'll be sending documentation through my attorney. Do not act on another word from that apartment without contacting me directly. Understood?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely." I hung up and sat on the back porch. The day had warmed slightly, but I felt cold. My hands were steady, though. That surprised me. I stared at the yard, at the worn fence I kept meaning to replace, at the wind chimes barely moving in the breeze. And I thought about every time I'd let something slide, every time I'd chosen peace over truth, every time they'd weaponized my kindness. I should have seen it coming. The subtle digs, the guilt trips, the way Harlan always managed to make himself the center of Mom's attention, even when she was sick. The way Daxton used to borrow money and forget. The stories they told others while I was in the room, pretending I didn't hear them rewriting our family. Not anymore, I whispered. I called Emery back. No more money, I said, not a cent, effective today. She didn't argue. I'll have the cease and desist drafted and sent. You're sure? I've never been more certain. As I ended the call, I looked up at the sky. It was clear now. No clouds, no fog, just sharp, cold clarity. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't drowning in their chaos. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. I thought cutting off the money would calm them down, but by evening, I realized it only made them desperate. The moment my phone started vibrating nonstop, I knew Harlan and Daxton had found a new way to strike back. At first, I thought it was spam, unknown numbers lighting up my screen every few minutes, but they didn't stop, one after another. No voicemails, no texts, just a steady stream of missed calls. Then came the pounding on my front door. Not a knock. Pounding. Sharp. Urgent. I opened the door cautiously and found two uniformed officers standing on my porch under the yellow glow of the porch light. "Mr. Rowan Vance?" one asked, already glancing behind me into the house. "Yes. Is something wrong?" "We're responding to a wellness check," the other officer said. "A report came in that you were screaming inside, threatening to hurt yourself and possibly destroy property." I blinked. "What?" The taller one shifted, trying to peer past me again. "Are you alone in the house?" "Yes, but this is a mistake. I'm fine." "We'll still need to come inside, sir." I stepped back reluctantly, heart thudding as they entered. They scanned the living room, kitchen, and hallway, taking note of everything. The air was tense, heavy with the implication. "Sir," one officer said finally, "the caller claimed you shouted, 'I can't do this anymore,' and were smashing things." I exhaled hard, trying to stay composed. "No one's been here. I haven't even raised my voice." They looked at each other. The younger officer softened slightly. "Sometimes people file these calls maliciously. Inheritance disputes, real estate fights, family money. We've seen it." It hit me like a slap. This wasn't just some random scare tactic. This was a documented strategy, using law enforcement to make someone look unstable, to create a record. I looked the officer in the eye. "It was my stepfather and brother. I cut them off financially this morning." He gave a slow nod. "Just know, someone's building a file on you." After they left, I stood in the center of my living room. The silence that followed was louder than the banging on the door. The lights were still on, my phone still buzzing occasionally on the counter, but all I felt was exposed. Violated, like they'd broken into my mind, not just my home. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the dawning realization that this was going to get uglier. I didn't have long to process. My phone rang again, this time Emery. "Rowan," she said without a hello, "we've got a problem." "Of course we do." "One of your secondary accounts triggered a fraud alert. Someone tried to move funds with a digitally signed form. I just got the email." She forwarded it immediately. I opened it and stared. My name, my account, and at the bottom, a signature. It looked almost right. My name, the curve of the letters, the trailing tail I always added on the last E. But it wasn't mine. It was close, sloppy. A copy and paste job layered with just enough. Care to fool someone who didn't know better. Daxton. He'd always been good with tech, just not good enough to beat a bank's fraud system. I stared at the document, bile rising. "They were going to steal everything," I whispered. Emery didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, quietly, "This was planned, Rowan. None of this is spontaneous." They've been preparing for months. I sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa, the weight of everything pressing into my chest. How could I not see it? I muttered. All those years, all the bills, the dinners, the favors. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting my mom. You were, she said gently. You just didn't realize who you were protecting her from. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, head in my hands. Shame washed over me. Not because I'd been generous, but because I'd ignored the signs. Because I'd convinced myself that family meant something to people who never treated me like I belonged. A dark thought crept in. Maybe if I just wired them one more payment, maybe they'd stop. Maybe they'd feel like they won and let me go. I reached for my phone, opened the banking app, started typing in the numbers by muscle memory, a long breath. My finger hovered over transfer. Buzz. A text. It was a photo. No words, just a snapshot. From a neighbor near the Penthouse. The same one who once asked me to recommend a handyman. The picture showed Harlan and Daxton in the lobby, laughing, drinks in hand, toasting. The caption below, looks like they're having a victory toast. I stared at the image, my thumb frozen above the screen. Something in me flipped. The shame, the doubt, the panic, all snapped into a sharp, white-hot clarity. I backed out of the app, deleted the draft transfer, deleted the whole payment template. They weren't scared of losing me. They were scared of losing access to what I controlled. So the next morning, I walked into my attorney's office and said, "It's time to stop playing defense." Emery Clark looked up from her desk, eyes narrowing behind her glasses. She didn't ask me to sit. I didn't need the invitation. I lowered myself into the leather chair, heart steady for the first time in days. There was no more room for fear, just facts and action. She slid a folder toward me without a word. Inside were call logs, her office line, time-stamped. 3 attempts, all from the same number, all from Harlan. "He used your full legal name," she said, her tone clipped. "Date of birth, too." My jaw flexed. I didn't speak. "He claimed to be you," she continued, "and asked for access to your trust documents. He said there was an emergency change that required immediate review." I looked down at the paper. My information used like a battering ram against my own life, my own privacy. "This," she added, tapping the folder with her pen, "is impersonation of a trust beneficiary. That's a felony in Texas." "Someone coached him," I muttered. Emery nodded. "Exactly what I thought." A stillness settled between us. Not silence, just wait. That realization that we weren't dealing with desperation anymore. We were dealing with premeditation, planning, calculation. "They think I won't fight back," I said quietly, "because I never have." Her gaze met mine, calm but unflinching. "You are now." I straightened. "We freeze all discretionary accounts connected to the Penthouse, utilities, HOA autopay, credit cards they've been riding on, all of it." She clicked her pen. "Anything else?" "Begin proceedings to terminate permissive occupancy. They want to live like owners. Let them find out what legal tenants have to do." Emery scribbled a note. "They'll push back." "I know." "You ready for that?" "They weaponize the police, Emery," I said, voice even. "They stopped being my family the moment they decided I was easier to erase than respect." For a second, her expression softened. "Okay, Rowan, let's go on offense." When I left her office just after noon, something shifted inside me. The air felt different, lighter, or maybe I was just less burdened. Downtown Dallas buzzed around me, cars honking, people talking, the rhythm of a weekday unfolding. But I moved through it with a strange kind of calm, Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that grows from choosing clarity over chaos. I stopped at a nearby open-air plaza, just outside a bookstore I used to visit on lunch breaks back when things felt normal. I ordered a sandwich and iced tea and sat at one of the shaded outdoor tables. I was halfway through my drink when I heard it. "Rowan!" The voice was loud, sharp, meant to draw attention. I turned. Daxton, coming toward me fast, phone up, filming. "There he is," he yelled, angling his camera. "The thief himself." People turned, heads lifted from their meals. Conversations froze. He stopped a few feet away from me, face flushed, a grin twisted with rage. "Come on, big brother," he spat. "Tell them how you stole my inheritance. Tell them how you locked your own family out of their home." I stood slowly, calm, controlled. "Go ahead," he barked. "Hit me. You know you want to. Show them who you really are." I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned slightly toward the plaza security guard already making his way over. "Call the police," I said clearly. "This man is harassing me and has a documented history of fraud attempts on my accounts." Daxton blinked. I kept my hands where everyone could see them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look angry. Just steady. And that broke his rhythm. He lowered the phone for a split second, just enough to lose his footing in the performance. "You're a coward," he muttered, quieter now. "I'm a witness," I replied, "and so is everyone else." The guard stepped in, radio crackling. Daxton looked around, realizing people were watching, and not sympathetically. He turned off the live stream, mumbled something about legal harassment, then started backing away. When the police arrived a few minutes later, I calmly reported the previous forged transfer attempt, the harassment, and the earlier false wellness check. One of the officers took notes while another spoke with Daxton, who had retreated to the edge of the plaza. I could see him gesturing wildly, trying to explain something, anything. Eventually, an officer approached me. "Sir, based on what we've reviewed, there's a possible case here for intimidation and electronic fraud. Would you like to file now, or wait for your attorney?" "Emery will handle it," I said. He nodded. "You did the right thing staying calm. Most people wouldn't have." I gave a small, tight smile. I used to be most people. As I walked back to my car, something inside me felt different. Not lighter, stronger. I wasn't just surviving them anymore. I was outmaneuvering them. They hadn't expected that. And I knew now. I didn't need their respect. I needed them out of my life. But that night, as I was finally starting to breathe, my doorbell rang, and everything escalated again. When I opened the door and saw the envelope taped to the glass, I knew this wasn't over. They had found a new angle. It was after 9. The porch light hummed quietly behind me as I peeled the thick manila envelope off the door. Legal seal. Heavy. Too formal for a bluff. Too sudden for a misunderstanding. I locked the door behind me, walked into the kitchen, and placed it on the table. My fingers hesitated for a second before breaking the seal. Inside, the papers were crisp, thick, deliberate. I scanned the first page, and the words hit harder than any slap ever could. Petition for protective order. Allegation of financial coercion and emotional abuse. Filed by Harlan and Daxton. Against me. They were accusing me, of manipulating and isolating my own mother. Of exerting undue influence over her. Of controlling her finances, her movements, her care. As if I had kidnapped her from their loving arms and locked her away. I sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't even feel my hands. The rage hadn't arrived yet. It was just shock. A betrayal so precise it nearly stole my breath. I picked up the phone and called Emery. She picked up on the second ring. Rowan? I just got served, I said, my voice flat. Elder abuse, financial manipulation. They filed a claim. Silence. Then, I told you they'd flip the story first. They're trying to trap you in the public eye. On paper. In court. I'm the one who saved her, I whispered, voice cracking. I pulled her out of that place. I paid for everything. They don't care, Emery cut in. This was never about fairness. It's about controlling the narrative. You became too powerful, too fast. Now they're trying to burn the story before you can tell it. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the last line of the petition. Temporary protection order requested. Respondent not to contact subject until court hearing. Subject, Marlowe. My mother. I ended the call and tried hers. Voicemail. Tried again. Still nothing. Something inside me twisted, tight, primal. I grabbed my coat and keys and left the house without a second thought. The drive across town was quiet. Cold air rolled through the cracked window as I passed dimly lit intersections and sleepy gas stations. The streets were mostly empty. The stillness made the fear louder. When I pulled into the driveway of her small rental, I saw her porch light flickering weakly. Her blinds were drawn, the house too quiet. I knocked gently. It took a long moment before she opened the door. Her eyes were tired, hollow, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from being worn down over time. She didn't say anything, just stepped back to let me in. I hugged her carefully. She flinched. When I pulled back, I saw the faint bruise on her wrist. "Mom," I said, voice low, steady. "What happened?" She looked away. "They came earlier. Harlan and Daxton. I didn't let them in. But they left things. Papers. Threats." Her voice wavered. "Someone called my doctor, Rowan. Said they were a family advocate. Asked about my memory. My prescriptions. They wanted them to note decline. Mental decline." I stared at her, unmoving. "They said I was confused," she added. "That I might be unsafe." The nurse looked at me like I was fragile glass. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes. They weren't just rewriting my story now. They were coming for hers, piece by piece. "They want to prove you're unstable," I said, "to support their abuse claim." She nodded slowly. For the first time, she let herself cry. Quiet, exhausted tears that slipped down her cheeks with no attempt to hide them. I knelt beside her and took her hands, careful of her bruises. "This is not your fault," I told her. "They're doing this because they're losing control. Because you're not under their roof anymore." Her shoulders shook, and suddenly I saw her, not as my mother, not as the woman who held our family together for decades, but as someone who had carried too much for too long, someone who had been treated like a pawn even longer than I had. We sat in silence for a long while. Then I stood, wiped my face. The decision had already been made before I walked in her door, but now it burned like iron in my chest. "Mom," I said, "I need you to trust me." She looked up at me, eyes red. "I'm ending this, all of it." I stepped outside and dialed Emery. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "we escalate. I want every legal path open, full countersuit, restraining orders, medical affidavits. We move." "You sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure." Because it wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about protecting the woman they never expected to break free. The woman they thought they could silence with paperwork and whispered lies. The woman they wounded without ever intending to heal. That thought echoed in my head as I drove through the early morning mist toward Emery's office. The skyline hadn't fully broken through the gray yet, and the city felt hushed, like it knew something was about to crack wide open. When Emery slid the final document across her desk, my entire world tilted. This wasn't just a counterattack. It was a declaration of war. She didn't say anything at first. Her eyes just held mine with a quiet kind of fury. I could tell she hadn't slept. They filed it around 3:20 this morning, she said, an emergency injunction. They're alleging you strategically coerced your mother, seized her property, and froze their access to basic necessities. I stared at the bold header. Petition for emergency protection against financial exploitation. The words burned. They're turning everything I did for her into a weapon, I muttered. And they're not done, she said grimly, reaching for her laptop. She turned the screen toward me. It was a headline on a local Dallas news site, one of those that walked the line between journalism and gossip. Wealthy son exploits vulnerable mother in decades-long financial scheme. I read the first few lines. They painted me as a manipulator, a man who used his mother's fragility to siphon wealth and control her estate. They quoted sources close to the family. They published doctored screenshots, text messages twisted out of context, and a ledger that looked like mine, except for the altered dates and inflated transfers. There were even photos, one of me helping my mother out of a car, another of her sitting quietly on a bench, staring into the distance. They'd chosen every image to suggest isolation, fragility. By the time I scrolled halfway down, my phone started buzzing. 2 texts, then 6, then 23. Business partners, clients, people I hadn't heard from in years. Is this true? What's going on? You need to get ahead of this. The knot in my chest pulsed like a live wire. They're trying to erase who I am, I said under my breath. Emery slammed her pen on the desk. Then we don't give them time to breathe. She reached for a legal pad and began scribbling. We file emergency reversal, defamation, financial tracing, all of it. Today. Right now. I nodded slowly, the storm inside me turning into something colder. Clearer. They wanted to destroy me with noise, I said. It's time I speak, in fact. By mid-morning, we were at the courthouse. The hallway buzzed with low conversations, paper shuffles, and muffled footsteps. Across the corridor, I saw them, Harlan in his usual sport coat, arms crossed like he was posing for a magazine cover. Daxton stood half a step behind him, whispering something. Harlan smirked wider. I didn't flinch, just breathed. In, out. They weren't here to plead a case. They were here for spectacle. A clerk called us into a side conference room. That's when I opened my bag and pulled out the black binder I'd carried quietly for 2 decades. It looked unremarkable, worn edges, a cracked corner. But inside was every receipt, every mortgage payment, every tuition check, every grocery run I'd covered, from 2003 until this very year. Every sacrifice they'd claimed as their right. I had the proof. I slid the binder to Emery. Her eyes scanned the first few pages, then widened. This isn't just a defense, she said, voice hushed. This is a knockout blow. I shook my head. It's not a punch. It's the truth. 10 minutes later, Harlan and Daxton walked into the room. Harlan was already talking before he sat down. We've been advised to seek a full injunction. Emery cut him off. Calm. Precise. I suggest you stop speaking, she said, sliding the binder forward. And look, Harlan laughed. What is this? A scrapbook? He flipped the first page. The grin died on his face. Daxton leaned in and his color drained. Fast, payment logs, check images, notes in my handwriting, copies of bills addressed to me, tax returns, insurance, healthcare authorizations, power of attorney from before they even knew what that term meant. Row by row, page by page. I leaned forward, voice steady. Every dollar you spent was mine. Every luxury you claimed, mine. Every lie you're telling ends today. Daxton opened his mouth, then closed it again. Harlan looked at Emery. This is manipulated. You can't just... Emery didn't blink. If you continue, I'll file federal-level fraud charges for the doctored documents you leaked to the press, and elder exploitation on behalf of your client. Harlan blinked. He tried again. We were misled. We didn't know. You knew exactly, I said. You used my silence for years. You thought it meant weakness. I stood. Today, it means you have nowhere left to hide. The air shifted in that room. The kind of shift that happens when the lies stop working. When the people who always spoke louder suddenly run out of words. For the first time in my adult life, I felt it. Not rage, not revenge. Just power. Clean. Earned. I stepped out of the courthouse with Emery beside me. The sky had cleared, blue, open, quiet. I thought the war was over. Until the call came that changed everything. When my phone rang and I heard my mother's trembling voice, I knew the final blow hadn't landed yet. She was whispering, shaky, breathless. He's outside, Rowan. He's at the door. He's pounding and yelling. I didn't open it. I didn't say anything. I was already grabbing my keys. Stay away from the door. Lock it. I'm on my way. The elevator ride down from the courthouse parking garage felt like an eternity. By the time I reached my car, I'd already called my firm's security contractor. They were 2 blocks from Marlowe's apartment and rerouting immediately. I wasn't going to let her face this alone. Not again. Traffic blurred. I barely registered the lights or honking. All I could think about was her voice, cracked, frightened, trying to be brave. When I pulled into her street, I spotted him instantly. Harlan was outside her unit, shouting at the door like a man possessed. "You ungrateful witch!" he yelled. "You let that boy turn you against me. I gave you everything. I gave you a name, a home, a life." Daxton stood behind him, hunched, arms folded across his chest. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even looking at her door, just staring blankly, like he wanted to vanish. I parked crooked at the curb and didn't even shut the car door behind me. Security arrived seconds later, stepped between me and Harlan without needing instruction. They were calm, trained, but ready. Harlan's voice cracked when he saw me. You did this. Everything was fine until you came back. You were supposed to stay gone." I didn't raise my voice, didn't take a step forward. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "And you were supposed to treat her like a human being." His mouth opened, but no words came. He reached toward me, wild-eyed, but my security stepped in and held him back. He wasn't hurt, just stopped, contained. And for the first time, I saw him for what he really was. Not powerful, not in control, just loud and scared of losing the lies he built his life around. Sirens pulled onto the block moments later. The neighbors had called them. 2 officers approached, calm but alert. They took statements from Marlowe's neighbors, from me, from the guards. One officer asked Harlan to step aside. Harlan refused. Tried to claim it was a misunderstanding. Then, the officer pulled out a paper from his folder. Emery's emergency filing. Protective order. Served. Valid. The arrest wasn't dramatic. No cuffs slammed. Just a slow realization in Harlan's face as they placed his hands behind him and walked him to the patrol car. Daxton didn't say a word. When the car pulled away, I turned back to the building. The door opened slowly. Marlo stood there in her robe, frail but upright. Her voice barely reached me. I didn't want any of this, Rowan. I didn't want it to get this far. I walked to her, steady and quiet. This wasn't your fault, I said. None of it was. She reached for my hand, and I took it gently. We stood like that a moment, just breathing. Inside, she settled onto the couch. The place was tidy, quiet, filled with soft light from the window. On the coffee table, something caught my eye. A small plastic bracelet, faded, bent out of shape. The hospital band from the day I was born. I remembered it from my childhood. She used to keep it in a jewelry box tucked behind old letters. I hadn't seen it in years. I picked it up. It was still marked with my name. Still dated. A silent kind of proof. And suddenly, all the noise faded. All the lawsuits, the accusations, the betrayal. It shrank beside this tiny reminder of who I had been to her, of why I had fought, of what none of them could touch. She noticed me holding it. I kept it, she said, even after everything, because no matter how bad things got, that day was mine, just mine. I sat beside her, still holding the bracelet. I thought you stayed with him because you didn't care, I said. I thought maybe you blamed me for leaving. She shook her head, eyes welling. I stayed because I was scared, of being alone, of not being enough. I thought you'd moved on, that you wanted space from all of it. And there it was. The truth. We'd both been silent for the same reason, thinking our absence protected the other. Meanwhile, Harlan had thrived in that space between us. But no more. Later that evening, back at my place, Emery called. The court reviewed everything, she said. The media's starting to walk back their coverage, and your firm just issued a statement clearing your name. It's turning. I thanked her. Daxton? I asked. She hesitated. No charges yet, but he's implicated. Might face a civil suit later. I exhaled. I didn't hate Daxton. Not anymore. He'd been a product of Harlan's world, but he didn't own me anything now. Just distance. After the call, I poured a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the balcony. The Dallas skyline blinked in the distance, glass and steel under the weight of twilight. The air felt different now. Lighter. In my hand, I still held the hospital bracelet. It was worn, small, but it had survived, just like we had. And I thought about what survival really meant, not just enduring, but choosing, finally, to live with boundaries, with truth, with dignity. You can give someone everything, your money, your time, your peace, but the moment they turn your kindness into a weapon, that's when you take back your life. And I had. But there was one thing I still needed to do. A conversation I had avoided for 20 years.